Anyway, um, where we're at now is that area that Bob calls the void. And if you remember, he divides transitions into three phases. There is an ending, the void, and then new beginnings. So one thing that I always think about when I think about this time is something that my first sponsor, Jay, who took me through the steps back in Florida a couple of years after I got sober, Jay had certain things that he would always say to me. And one of them was, they always say when one door closes, another door opens, but they don't tell you about that time in the hall. And that hall, metaphorically, is exactly what the void is. And the thing about the hall is we generally want to be able to go, open, go, step, shut, open, step, shut. Now I'm on to the new thing. But life really doesn't work that way. And it so doesn't work that way that it's almost ingrained into our subconscious. And that's why so many of the myths and legends and stories, the monomyth that Joseph Campbell writes about, even Jesus's story in the Bible, and as Bob writes about, he takes us through the Exodus as part of this book. And, he talks about endings as being the end of the Israelites' time in Egypt, and the void as being that time they wander in the desert, right? And then the new beginning is when they get to the promised land. Well, Jesus did very much the same thing. He would spend time in the void, and, famously, it's recorded that after he kind of went through seminary, quote unquote, with John the Baptizer, he spent 40 days and nights, again, quote unquote, air quotes, in the wilderness. So he spent time in the void before returning and beginning his ministry. So, there's some things that are very uncomfortable for us about moving from an ending into the void. One of the things, even though a lot of us might say, I'm glad that rough part's over with, but it's hard for people to make that adjustment because it's a serious change of pace. A lot of times when something is ending, there's this frantic rush of activity. And Bob says that an ending is often a time of turmoil and confusion. The void is a time of emptiness and flatness. And in the book, he talks about how you could describe an ending as maybe an earthquake, or experiencing an earthquake, and the void as, like a walk through a desert, or, sailing on what feels like an endless sea. For me, it's almost the difference between, riding a roller coaster and being in one of those sensory deprivation tanks, and I think about the things that I have, the endings and voids that I've gone through, whether it's been, the ending of a marriage, or the ending of a career, the ending of a job. Towards the end, things get pretty hectic. And then after you've done the paperwork and, done all the moving and packing and boxing and whatnot, then you're just kind of left there for a while wondering what's next. And the key is not to get stuck on what's next, but to allow ourselves that time to breathe into what's now. What's really going on right here and right now. It's part of the problem is when we are experiencing that void, when we have let something go or lost something, part of what we lose is our identity. Our ego may have identified ourselves with whatever that thing was that ended, whether it was a job or a marriage or some other kind of relationship, or even any other kind of way that we identified ourselves. I think about athletes right? You know, you think about all the kids that grow up playing a sport, and you know, maybe they're good enough to play it all the way through high school. Wow, maybe even they get a college scholarship. And the number of kids that can turn a college scholarship into a professional career is minuscule. So you may be retired at 22. You know, that's the last time I'm ever going to do that. Laura was, I mean, the next best thing to a professional debater. Really, I mean, she put herself through college on a debate scholarship, but and that was like her life for years. I mean, she lived, ate, and breathed debate. She was one of the best debaters in the country her senior year in college, and then done. No more debate. You know, there was no, okay, I'm going to go pro. But that happens all the time. But we really identify ourselves as whatever that thing was. I know for myself, you know, when I went all the way through college and grad school and I said, I'm a director. And then I left Cal Arts and I couldn't get a job as a director. And while I still, you know, in my heart of hearts, I know I'm a good director. Laura's more of a director than I am because she's been directing, right? And that's hard. So it's really hard right when it happens. You know, right as we are letting go of that thing, it's like, if I'm not that, who am I? And that leaves this, you know, and for those of you that are on the phone, I have a picture here of, it's kind of like a little mannequin looking, you know, at its reflection in a window. And the reflection is kind of, you know, like a ghost. And what Bob says is, in the void, time and space seem to lose their reality. Self seems like a phantom. And the reason it seems like a phantom is because it's not what it was. You know, we don't recognize it. It's not solid. We can't grab hold of it anymore because it's just not there. I mean, in our heart, we want to keep it there, but it's just not the same. What that gets to is a deep rooted fear that we have. And you know, when it's funny, I think that the psychologists have figured out that all human fears can be traced back to a fear of death. So, you know, certainly this fear of nothing is a projection of the fear of death. What Bob says is that the void touches our deepest fears. Most would do anything to avoid these feelings. We don't want to think about that stuff. You know, that's why, you know, for thousands of years, billions of people have bought into this idea that if I just believe this story, I'm going to live this afterlife in this wonderful heaven. And I'm not going to need anything, and everything's going to be lovely, and everything's going to be, everyone's going to be nice, and there's going to be, you know, harp music and clouds and gold paved streets, and I'll never want for anything. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Because we don't want to think about the other possibilities. You know, we don't want to think about nothing. Nothing seems scary. Well, what can happen is when we're experiencing even a kind of nothing, you know, when we've had something happening and then it stops, when we've been doing a job and it's gone, when we've been part of a marriage or a part of a relationship and it goes away. In that void, in that hollow, in that echo chamber, you know, stuff can start coming up out of our unconscious because it wants to fill it. It wants to fill that emptiness in our conscious life. And those of you that have tried meditating, and I hope that's everybody, but you know, we all know that experience of, okay, I'm gonna meditate now. I'm gonna sit down like Reverend Charles told me to, and I've got this timer thing, and I'm gonna meditate. And you lay back, and all of a sudden, all kinds of stuff starts coming out. You know, stuff that you may not have consciously thought about for years. people, voices, memories, stuff. It just starts coming out to fill the emptiness. That's actually a good thing. And, one of the things that I recommend is have a meditation journal, so that if something comes up when you're meditating, you can just jot it down real quick. You don't have to say, okay, I'm going to remember this. I got to remember this. No, just jot it down real quick and then go back and try to get back into the silence and just, see what else comes out, if anything. But as Bob says, in the void, the unconscious may invade consciousness with very strange feelings and images. I also found it extremely personally informative. Something he said when he's talking about that fear that we have of the of nothing, of the void, he says, it is the avoidance of these feelings that is behind many of our addictive and dysfunctional behavior patterns. These behaviors are defenses. We're trying to defend against what it feels like to feel nothing. And, as someone who identifies as an alcoholic addict, I get that. It's either there were feelings that I didn't want to feel, or things that I wanted to feel that I didn't know how to feel, or there just wasn't anything and I wanted to feel something. I get that. It's very, I think that's very accurate what he says about that. So the point is, though, that these transitions happen to all of us. Life is a natural transition, and it's not just a transition, but it is it's a series of transitions. I probably mentioned this before, but when I was in seminary, I wrote a research paper in my Metaphysics 2 class on Harry Potter and the hero's journey. And I described Harry's arc from the first book through the last book as one big long hero's journey. But then I also noticed that the argument could be made that he experiences a smaller hero's journey in each one of the 7 books. And I think that's true of all of us. We don't all only experience one transition. We keep transitioning throughout our lives, right? And it's a natural part of being human. And sometimes, it really shows up in stories. And what Bob says about something that happens to us in the void, he says, in the rites of passage, and that's a very that's part of the hero's journey, that rite of passage. That is the hero's journey. He says, in the rites of passage, it is in the void that the initiate encounters his transpersonal power. But first, he must face the dark side of himself. He is challenged to the fullest. And for those of you on the phone, I actually have a picture of Luke Skywalker's face inside Darth Vader's mask. And if you remember that part of his training when he was on Dagobah and Yoda takes him into the cave, and it's, the whole story, and I've used this in sermons before because it is just such great stuff. And it is about the transition that happens in the hero's journey. It is about encountering our transpersonal power and facing the dark side of ourselves. When Yoda tells him, strong with the dark side of the force that is in you must go, and Luke straps on his lightsaber, Yoda tells him, your weapons, you will need them not. Well, Luke keeps his weapon with him, goes in there, and of course gets into a sword fight with what he thinks is Darth Vader. And then when he cuts off its head, the mask blows away and it reveals his own face. And, yes, it's foreshadowing that Darth Vader's his father, but it's also foreshadowing the fact that he too has a dark side and that he has to overcome that. Now, he has the ability to, which was part of the lesson of that cave, because he overcame that. But it challenged him. And as Bob says, he is challenged to the fullest. But this is where we become who we might be. And we can't become who we might be without this time in the void, without the entire journey of transformation. There's so much that we learn in these, what seem to be times of nothing. It's those times when we're able to kind of strip away the junk and find out what and who we really are. Bob says this can be a difficult period of life, but a very important one, an opportunity for new freedom and empowerment, a time for transformation. And he says that just as there are seasons of nature, there are seasons of the soul, periods when something dies and is reborn. This is less, this is less noticeable in some people's lives and more noticeable in other people's lives. But it happens to all of us. There are always endings, there are always new beginnings, and there are always, those times in between, sometimes shorter and sometimes longer. I look at what's going on in the United States right now, and we're in some kind of a void right now. And I certainly hope that we come through this to a new beginning that is going to work and is going to be kinder and more compassionate. I don't know that that's the case for right now. I think the recent past tells us that we have a lot more differences than we wanted to admit to. And actually that's a healthy thing, because we have to identify what our stuff is before we can clean our stuff up. That's part of the magic of the 12 steps, right? Once you get into the actual cleaning house, the first thing you do is you write a list of all the stuff you got to clean up. I think a lot of people in this country didn't realize we had as big a mess as we have. But it's become very clear. We have a lot of people who don't understand what racism is. Certainly what systemic racism is. We have a lot of people that don't believe in it. We have a lot of people that, say, hey, we had a black president, black people can do anything. No problems. We don't need to fix anything. It's all good. We have a lot of people who seem to think that we don't need to do anything else for women, right? And who are, really trying to make sure that the Equal Rights Amendment never passes as an amendment. There is a season for everything. And, it's my prayer that there's going to be a season for us to fix these things that still ail us, even though we may not have known it. Bob points out that one of the issues that seems to be a problem is that we in the West, in Western thought, we really have a problem with letting go. And boy, are we ever seeing that writ large right now, right? That the idea is that to say that we are growing, it's an additive process, and it always requires more and more and more. Let me see if I can find, because that's a really good quote. Yeah, he says, yet we in the West have a fear of the season of emptiness. We don't trust it. We try to fill it with something or seek to find a distraction. And then here's the real key. Culturally, we tend to see growth as an additive process, an ever expanding movement into more and more and more. Rarely do we think of growth in terms of letting go. Yet, letting go is an essential step in recreation. It is a vital part of any creative process. I mentioned a few weeks back that that song by Daniel Nahmod about my empty hands. And Natalie, I think you actually went out and listened to it and ended up in tears the way I do when I listen to it. But that's exactly what Daniel's saying, that we have to empty our hands in order for God to place something new there. And if we keep hanging on to something that doesn't feed us, that's not for us, that is not who we are, we're going to be miserable. And I've got for those of you on the phone, I've got a quote here. It's like a meme that says, "It is bitter irony to see people who can't let go of someone or something for fear of emptiness in their life, yet their spirits are wasting away because they choose to hold on." And boy, is that ever common, especially as Bob points out here in the West. He says that all creation begins with emptiness. It is from the emptiness that new life emerges. The new self is born from emptiness. And, we think that may be true in the greatest macro that there is. The physicists are now saying that they believe it's possible that the way the universe recycles itself is at the end of time, everything gets sucked into a giant black hole, and then all that matter gets spewed out into a new universe, and there's another big bang, and the whole thing starts over again. It's possible. But I know at the micro level, for me at least, it feels exactly the same way. I have had to remake myself over and over again. And each time there's been a time when it felt like I had nothing, like I was nothing, I had nothing. Life was just empty. And yet, each time I have been given a gift of something that has moved me on to where I am today. And I as much as I wish that I did not have to have had all the pain of all the lessons along the way, I wouldn't give up what I have now for anything. I have the love of my life, and I have my health, and I have kids who love me, and I have you guys, I have friends, I have a dog that follows me everywhere I go. Life is good. But I had to allow myself nothing. And I have to keep returning to nothing. I get squirrely if I don't meditate and try to return my mind to nothing. This past week, I'm going to tell on myself here for a minute before I let you go. So this past week, I got busy and I didn't meditate for like 3 days. Well, on the third day, it was Thursday, and the garbage was supposed to get picked up. Apparently it didn't, right? So it's late afternoon, sun's going down, and I was, moving boxes around and stuff. I look out and I noticed there's a guy going through my trash. Now, things being what they are, my first thought is, because of the way he was like just picking stuff up, it wasn't like he was like, "Oh, this is great stuff, I'm going to take it." I thought he was like looking for stuff like that had my personally identifying information on it, like it was an identity theft thing. So I came out of my house and was rather hostile. Turns out they'd sent out one sanitation worker who was like covered in head to toe he was dirty as could be, but he was an actual sanitation worker in a beat up old city pickup truck, which just looked like a beat up truck from my house. As I got closer to it, I could see it actually had city tags, and he was like legit. They'd sent him out to grab people's trash by hand. He was using his bare hands and picking up the trash and throwing it in the back of his pickup truck because we'd gotten missed, and they wanted to make sure that the customers got taken care of. So I kind of felt ashamed that I had yelled at the guy, and then realized, how did you get angry so quickly? Well, I haven't been meditating. I haven't been plugging into nothing, which I really need really badly. So that kind of leads us into, some of the things that we can do to help, right? If we look at the void not as a time to run away from, but as a time to help us grow into who we're going to be next, it seems easier. It's like maybe I'll actually crawl into that cocoon, right? I have a picture of a butterfly going through the chrysalis stage. And Bob says that the void can be seen as a time when we shed the husks of our old self to become more of who we really are. Now, sometimes it's like a really profound change, like it is for the caterpillar that becomes a butterfly. Now, sometimes that shedding of the husk is more like a snake that is shedding its skin just so it can get a little bigger, right? May not be dramatic, but you're still growing, okay? But sometimes it's a complete change from what we were into what we're meant to become. And what we need to do is we need to remember that time, that time in the bubble, that time in the hall, that time in the cocoon, that's sacred time. Bob says that many mystics, both Eastern and Western, emphasize the importance of sacred emptiness. And then I found this meme that I thought, wow, that's profound. So I wanted to share it with you. And, again, for those of you on the phone, it says, social media has colonized what was once a sacred space occupied by emptiness, the space reserved for thought and creativity. I think it's an interesting way of looking at it. Now, Lord knows I get a lot out of social media. It's funny. I jumped onto Facebook years ago because I wanted to keep an eye on my kids who, were both at that point out of the house. I think I got on Facebook in 2009, which is when Colleen graduated from high school. And then it became a way of catching up with friends. And then it became a way of riding herd on what was going on in church. And so it's kind of taken on this, and now it's a way of taking down people with differing political views. But the idea that what it's done is it's taken that kind of sacred space that we had and then turned it into this, like dumped it out on the freeway, on the information highway. I think that's something that we need to look at, because there is something sacred and something secret about that place where nothing is. And Bob notices that the void can be seen as a passageway to becoming truly alive and fully awake. And I got a picture of like a secret passageway. And anybody that's ever played D&D knows, the good stuff's really on the other side of the secret passageway, right? And it's that way in life, really. I mean, it's a metaphor that if you want to find the treasure, the real treasure is beyond that secret passageway. And for the most part, we have to go it alone. We have to go in and just spend that time, scary as it is sometimes. We have to keep breathing and just keep going through it. So, simple instructions. And I know that I try to avoid doing a wall of words, but this was well worth it, okay? So as Bob says, there are several practical things that one can do to aid the journey through the void, right? Thing one, embrace each experience fully and then let it go. The idea is, If we keep trying to deny it, to push it back, it's going to stay in our face until we just let it go. The whole idea behind the grief process, right? To get to acceptance, we have to go past denial, past anger, past bargaining, right? We have to get through that. And, you know, I mean, there's a lot of back and forth, and you can have a couple of those things at the same time. But to stay stuck on denial or to stay stuck on anger means we're not going to get through it. We need to experience it and let it go. Here's one from straight out of the 12 steps. It's what we tell every newbie that comes in. Avoid making any major decisions or long-term commitments. So when we're in 12 step, it's like for your first year in recovery, right? And for most people, that is a time in the void. I don't think they've ever actually said, oh, you're in the void, so you need to just kind of chill out here, right? But don't commit to anything that you're going to regret later on, or that you're not going to be able to fulfill a commitment later on. You know, there's a real temptation to just jump into something, even if it's wrong, because it feels less scary than the nothing that you're experiencing. Allow the nothing to inform your next move before you make your next move. And also, don't try to push the river, right? You can't make time happen faster. You can't get them to open the door faster by banging, right? Again, in 12 step, we have this, all this stuff reminds me of 12. Again, in 12 step, we say time takes time. You know, I couldn't be 5 years sober 5 months into the program. I could only be 5 months sober, right? Same thing with anything else. After my last divorce, I was a wreck. Some of you saw that, right? I was a mess. I could be 2 years divorced 2 weeks after I got divorced. Trying to pretend that I could, which I did, turned into a real problem for me. You know, I tried to just gut it out, and I was not my best. You know, I mean, I was kind of the poster child for this dude needs to go sit in a corner for a while. So, you know, we live and learn. Pray and meditate for regular periods each day. That's pretty self-explanatory. And I know for some people, it's, oh, I'm too busy. And the busier you are, the more you need to pray and meditate every day, right? And you just start with a minute, start with 2 minutes, start with 5 minutes, start small. It's kind of like when Laura started running, she did something called the Couch to 5K, right? And this program where really just start like, okay, so you're going to get up and you're going to walk for a mile, right? You're just going to walk. That's all you're going to do. And then you very slowly build on that. Same deal, right? Just make sure that you spend some time in the silence every day. Like I just said, you know, the days that I, you know, get busy, skip, forget, whatever, eventually it catches up with me. And I realize when I am either losing my temper or my emotions start swinging, something go, you know, I find myself eating more than I should, or like, you know, oh yeah, I'll go ahead and have 2-3 sugar donuts. Why am I doing that? Have I been meditating like I'm supposed to? Probably not. Trust in God. It's funny, again, Dr. Bob, who was one of the 2 people that first came up with the 12 steps, said that the whole 12 steps could be boiled down really to 3 things: trust God, clean house, help others. Very first thing we learn is to trust God. It's hard. It's especially hard when you've had something precious taken away. And I know that. I know that. But if we are willing to trust God and to keep doing our work, what happens can be not only transformational, but spectacular. Take care of yourself physically. This is difficult sometimes, especially if The transition we're going through is one that makes it difficult for us to maintain a positive self-image. If we're not thinking good thoughts about ourselves, it becomes twice as hard, but 3 times as important to take good care of ourselves. And, that's just the simple stuff like, get enough sleep, eat food that's good for you, drink enough water, get some exercise, take care of yourself. Pay attention to your dreams. Things can show up as, like one of the slides back before talked about stuff coming out of your subconscious. Well, your subconscious is where your dreams come from. And, very often things will come out in dreams. It's always good to have something to write on, right? Around you, wherever you are, whether you're in meditation, even in bed, right? If you wake up from a dream, jot something down. If it really stuck out, if it seems important. I have on several occasions either come out of meditation or, when I woke up in the morning after dreaming about a person, especially people that I haven't thought about for a while, reached out to somebody and found out that they needed to hear from someone. I don't know how we're connected. I just know that we are. And it can also be something that tells me a little something about what's going on within myself. When we talk about journaling, keeping a daily journal can also help a lot. You'd be surprised at the stuff that comes out when you just put pen to paper and start writing. It's very therapeutic and very informative. And develop a support system. And certainly we are part of that support system. And I love when Bob says, this could include a counselor, friends, family, and/or support group. Have someone with whom you can share your innermost thoughts and feelings. Choose someone with whom you feel safe. I hope that everyone here feels that way about this group and about me. I hope that we are part of your support system. But, certainly we can't necessarily be all of it. Like, I have a therapist, right? I talk to a therapist every other week because it's always good for me to be able to just dump everything on my plate, on somebody that has absolutely no skin in the game whatsoever. Whatever that plan is, whatever that support system is, it's good to have it. And I love being part of this support system with all of you. It's been really, really a joy, And this is something that I don't think we do enough of. Create some type of ritual to symbolize your passage from the old life to the new. If you are going through some kind of transition, at some point you're going to feel like, hey, I'm ready. Or at least I'm ready to be ready, And at that point, maybe do a little something to start your new life. When we both get into our new home in Baton Rouge, I want to bless it. I want to have a ritual that blesses that house. And I think we can think about whatever it is that we're doing. When we go forward, we want to bless it. And that's, ritual, but the ritual can also be an honoring of what was gone. That's why we do things like we have graduation ceremonies. It's why we have funerals. It's why we have weddings. We mark these transitions with ritual, and it kind of places a bookmark in our minds and says, okay, now it's okay to leave that past behind. Now it's really time to move forward in a new and different way than we ever have before.